Hello. Today I'm going to be going over methods to solve quadratic equations with various methods. A quadratic equation is an equation that can be written as ax squared plus bx plus c, where a is not equal to 0. In other words, a quadratic equation is when the highest power of your terms is squared. The solution of a quadratic equation is the value of x when you set the equation equal to 0. There are several different methods of solving quadratic equations. We will be looking at square roots, factoring, graphing, the quadratic formula, and completing the square. You might be wondering, why do we need so many different methods to solve a quadratic equation? Well, the answer is simple. Sometimes some of the methods will not always work, such as square roots and factoring. But if you can get them to work, you will have less work. Well, the quadratic formula and completing the square will always work, but sometimes it will require you to work a little bit harder. And graphing will work, but technology using a graphing calculator is best. So, let's begin by looking at the square root method. The square root method is a very efficient way to solve a quadratic equation if you are missing the bx. So you can see here is the bx, we call that our middle term, but when you look at this example, it is not there. So here is an example of this situation. 9x squared minus 25 equals 0. Okay, we are missing the bx, so the first thing we do is isolate the x. So I simply add 25 to the other side. I get 9x squared equals 25. I divide by 9. Then I get x squared equals 25 over 9. To solve this, I take the square root of both sides, and I get x equals positive and negative 5 over 3. So that was quick and easy and only worked because there was no bx. That is the square root method. Another method that will make your problem easier is factoring. Now, the factoring method works because of something called the zero product property. This is when you have two factors multiplied together and equal to 0. You can simply take these factors, set each factor equal to 0, and solve. Now, how do you know if something will factor? Well, a quadratic will factor if the discriminant is a positive perfect square, and this is your discriminant, b squared minus 4ac. The b comes from your original quadratic, and your a and your c does as well. So let's check out 6x squared plus 5x minus 4 equals 0. So to test to see if this will factor, we are going to say a is 6, b 5, c negative 4, and we are going to simply plug into the discriminant formula to see if this is a positive perfect square. So b squared minus 4ac produces 25 plus 96. 25 plus 96 is 121, and 121 is in fact a positive perfect square because of 11 squared. So since it will factor, there's different ways to factor this: guess and check method, or you can also use the grouping method. So if you're familiar with the grouping method, what we're going to do is we're going to take this trinomial and we are going to split it into 4 terms. We do that by taking a and c and b, and we fill out this little chart. So 6 times negative 4 is negative 24, and b, which sometimes I call basement, will go here. So we guess and check all of the factors of 24 that will give me positive 5. So if we guess enough, we will come up with a positive 8 and a negative 3. Now, what's significant about these is we are going to take those and we are going to split and rename 5x. So if I say that 5x can be expressed as 8x minus 3, I do not change the value of my quadratic. Then we use the method of grouping. Now, the method of grouping, you group your terms together. So I like to just draw a line. We are going to group this side together first, then we will group these together. So 6x squared and 8x, that has a 2x in common. We're going to factor that out. We get left with 3x plus 4. This side, negative 3x minus 4, has a negative 1 in common, so we're going to factor that out, and we're going to get 3x plus 4. Now 3x plus 4, that's the common factor. You can bring that out front. And 2x minus 1 is what's left over. And there you can see we have two linear factors. So using the zero product property, I can say 3x plus 4 equals 0, 2x minus 1 equals 0, and now solve each linear equation. So 3x equals negative 4, divide by 3, x equals negative 4/3. And then this one, 2x equals 1, divide by 2, so x equals 1/2, and we have our answers. Now, the reason why we have two answers is the graph of a quadratic equation is in fact a parabola. So if we slide up to the graphing method, this is where if you have a graphing calculator, this would be a great check for you. So what we need to do is we need to take this equation, instead of 0, place a y equals so we can make it a graphing problem. So now we're going to go y equals 6x squared plus 5x minus 4, and we're going to graph it using a graphing calculator. Now I have a TI-83 plus, so I'm going to go to y equals, I'm going to type in my equation, so 6x squared plus 5x minus 4. I'm going to hit graph. Now here's the regular window. I really can't see what's going on here with my solutions, because remember, solutions are the same as x-intercepts. Okay, so as you can see here, we can't really see what's going on here, so I'm going to use the zoom feature on my calculator, and I'm going to zoom in on those intercepts. And let's see what happens here. Now remember from our previous problem, here is the negative 4/3, and you can see in fact that it is negative 4/3, and you can see 1/2. So grouping is a great way to help you factor. Factor will give you your solutions, and when you check that out on your graph, you can actually check and make sure that your roots or your zeros match up with graphing. So those methods are easier if they work for you. So they sometimes require less work. So now let's move on to the quadratic formula and completing the square. What's great about these methods, they will work always. So you can see the quadratic formula here. I have little music notes. I actually make my students sing a Sesame Street song to remember the formula. But you see the A, the B, and the C, and that's going to come from your original standard form. So let's look at 2x squared minus x minus 2 equals 0. And all you have to do is identify your A, your B, and your C. So let's plug and chug. Negative b plus or minus b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So we've got a lot of cleanup to do, so this will turn to a positive 1 plus or minus. This is going to be 1 plus 16, which will give us 17, all over 4. Now you can note here, I says this gives exact answers. This is your exact answer. If you were actually looking for the decimal answers, all you would have to do is you would take your calculator, say 1 plus square root 17 divided by 4, and your first solution will be x equals 1.28, and the second one would be 1 minus square root 17 divided by 4, and you get negative 0.78. So that's the quadratic formula. It is a great method if nothing else will work, because this one would not factor. Okay, last is completing the square. The quadratic formula actually comes from completing the square, and it can be used for any quadratic, but it is simplest to apply when a is 1 and b is an even number. Okay, so let's take a look at this example. As you can see, I have a quadratic where a is 1 and b is even. So your first step is to remove the 6 to the other side. So we get x squared plus 4x equals 6. Now the next step is to create a perfect square trinomial. So we need to get a number here, and how you get this number is you take the 4, which is in the b spot, divide it by 2, and square it. So 4 divided by 2 is 2, and 2 squared is 4. So if I add 4 to this side, I must add 4 to this side. Now the reason why we did that is because now we can actually factor this quadratic equation, x plus 2, x plus 2. And we can condense that to x plus 2 squared equals 10. Now, since we have the square, we can take the square root of both sides. These operations undo each other. I get x plus 2 equals plus or minus square root 10. Now you can see the x now is just x to the first, so I can say x equals, take this 2 over, slide it in front of this plus or minus square root 10, and there's your exact answer. And of course, just like before, if you wanted the decimal answers, you could simply plug that into the calculator. So, all of these methods can be used to solve quadratic equations. Some are easier than others, but just necessarily will not always work, where the quadratic formula and completing the square will always work if you know the correct steps.